Welcome, everybody, to episode 7 of Sharks Talk 916. Your hosts are me, Chad Thurston, and with me, as always, is Nolan Torrey, the brains of the operation. Just to give some clarification, a little behind the scenes, Nolan pretty much prepares all the agendas for the shows, and then I just say, yeah, that looks great, and get on and talk. It's really easy to do my job. He has to actually think about things. So it's been a pretty exciting second round for the Sharks in the playoffs. We're going to talk about a few things today. Just a reminder, we're brought to you by Sports Talk 916. So if you like sports other than Sharks in the Sacramento area, check out Sports Talk 916. They have a good podcast. They do it on the same website, the same Facebook page, which is Sports Talk 916 Network. And then we tweet on Sharks Talk 916 Twitter feed, so you can always check us out there. We try to tweet during games. It depends on how into the game I end up getting. If I'm too stuck watching the game or running around the living room, then I don't tweet as much. But check us out there.
Yeah, and I've been bad about that. I've let you handle our official account. I've been ranting and raving on my personal Twitter account. But sometimes I'm with you. When the game gets intense, I try to put down Twitter and focus on the game. So.
Yeah, that going back just real quick, that game 7, I didn't tweet anything during the entire comeback because I was too busy pacing around my house, being nervous to stop and tweet. So, but I've been pretty good about it this series. So check us out there, and I don't know, comment on our stupid comments that we make half the game. So let's jump in. So let's talk about Game 5 last night. I think was a huge win for us. I think you obviously would agree with that. Probably anybody who's a Sharks fan would agree with that. So let's do a little breakdown. So what did you see in Game 5?
Well, I feel like this is kind of a trend that I've noticed for the Sharks over the years, and I know every season is technically different, but it doesn't feel that way with this team, right? And they do have a lot of guys who have been there a long time, but a lot of the big playoff games, I feel like the Sharks play very well in, but they can't seem to break the ice and get the opening goal. And that was, again, the case last night. I mean, they were absolutely dominant the first period. Of course, they did get the first goal, and then it got overturned, which we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But putting aside that, they were playing really well. And Grubauer did make some excellent saves, and Jones did as well. Colorado didn't have many shots, but the ones they did have were of pretty good quality. Jones was up to the test as well. So both goalies played well, but the Sharks couldn't seem to find that opening goal. And then Colorado gets kind of a fluky bounce goal after the Sharks got a big penalty kill. And then probably the most critical part of the game is the Sharks get a power play shortly after that. Kane draws a penalty. One of the first positive things he's done in a while. And then they finally convert on that power play. And I thought what was interesting about that power play is Burns and Carlson were out there together, and sure enough, they scored. And it was one of those split power plays, too, between periods. So they only had like a minute and 20 seconds left in the second period of that power play and managed to convert it. And then the third period, they continued to play well. Hurdle stepped up, got the go-ahead goal, and then we had the adventures of missing 5 empty nets to close out the game.
So ridiculous, yeah. Yeah, I think that power play goal, to go back to that for a second, having Burns and Carlson on the ice, neither one of us have been big fans of that combo on the power play. And I don't think it helps necessarily for them getting shots to the net. But what I do think happens is it opens up some space in the middle. When you only have to worry about Burns shooting from the line, you kind of ignore Vlasic or whoever's on the other corner, right? But if you have both Burns and Carlson, then they have to come out and play them a little more. And so you see that where Couture gets a shot off and, Hurdle's able to tip it in. There's only one guy really between Hurdle and the net at that point, where when you watch all the other shots they take, there's 2 or 3 guys. One of the things Colorado is really good at is collapsing onto the net when they're playing defense. So I think that having both of them back on the blue line makes Colorado play more honest. They actually cover 5 guys instead of just kind of covering in front of the net. So while I'm not a huge fan of the combination usually, I think it does work well here with the
Well,
way
and
they do.
right now they've been struggling, right? So that's kind of my philosophy. Why not try it because nothing else is working? And certainly you're right, that combination did not work well at all early in the season. I think it might be a different story now just because Carlson has sort of found his place on the team. And you'll notice whenever he is out there with Burns, whether it's on the power play or the occasional shift that they take together, uh, he tends to defer to Burns quite often and becomes more of a setup guy as opposed to the shooter. And because I think he realizes Burns has the predominantly better shots, and Carlson just doesn't have the puck luck this year with his shots on net. So I think now that he's learned Burns' game, that they tend to play well together more so than they would have earlier in the year. And Carlson's kind of that creative force out there because a lot of times their power play is very stagnant and stationary, and Carlson will move the puck around and maybe try some stupid passes as well. But he tends to add a little unpredictability to the power play.
Well, it's easy to say, hey, Carlson doesn't have goals, right? But I mean, he's become the Joe Thornton of defense. I mean, he's got 11 assists. He's got the same number of points as Burns has. He just doesn't have any goals. So he's out there making plays. He's making things happen even when he's not scoring goals. And we've talked about that with other guys this year who had goal droughts, but they're doing something to contribute to the team. I think Carlson, I mean, to me, he looks 100%. I don't know. I don't know what he feels, but he looks 100% out there. He outskates Matt Nieto, right? Like he's just a force out there right now. And that's so nice to see. And this isn't really in our agenda, but one of the things that's been talked about at different times in the season is, are we keeping him? Do we try and sign him? Do we let him go? Is he too injured? Like, what's going on? Before the playoffs, I didn't think there was any chance we'd try to re-sign him. But now, I mean, I think he's showcasing it, if not for us, for everybody, that, hey, I'm back. I can still play. I'm still the old guy.
Yeah, the landscape has definitely changed in terms of possibly re-signing. I don't think him or the Sharks are concerned about that right now. They'll deal with it in the off season, but it's definitely he's become more attractive again the last week or two. And we talked about it going into the playoffs. I didn't think there was a chance in hell that he would get through a round or two without re-aggravating it.
Yeah.
Especially after watching the first few games against Vegas. I mean, he did not look good at all. He was clearly nursing it and was probably playing at like 60%. But apparently it was just a matter of time and building up the strength again. And I think also, too, a lot of it was a mental thing where he just had the confidence that, okay, I can go 100% without risking re-aggravating it. And you're right. He's getting better every game, and he seems to be, I don't know if he's 100%, but he's certainly as close as he's been in a very long time.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt when you look at him that he's become being back into this lineup and being healthy again. He's definitely making a major impact on the team. So Hurdle again shows up, right? He was kind of the hero of the last series, at least in my opinion. I've talked about him being the best forward that we have on the team, and at least this season. And I think that having him kind of wake up and show up has been a big deal. And then Logan, right? So it's really the story of four main guys. You got Logan, Hurdle, Burns, and Carlson have all the points in this series.
Really, it's felt like that way the whole playoffs, too. I mean, Kane, if I had to pick the biggest disappointment these playoffs, Kane is by far that guy. He's been pretty much invisible the entire playoff, both against Colorado and Vegas. I don't know what his deal is. I don't know if it's injury, if he's just not in the right headspace. And he's always kind of been a streaky player. Ant points out in the chat that Sorensen as well has been a little bit of a disappointment, but expectations aren't as high for Sorensen as Kane. And Kane, you're paying to be a primary contributor. So, like you said, in Couture and Hurdle, have really carried the load offensively for this team, and to me, that has to change moving forward if they want to, get by not just Colorado, but uh, either St. Louis or Dallas, and then hopefully someone in the East if we get that far.
Yeah, I mean, with Kane, it's hard. I was talking about this on the Shark Attack Facebook page that we both belong to, and someone said, "Kind of, what do you think is his problem?" And I don't. It's hard to say. He had two major things happen at the same time, right? He had an injury, and then he had, that terrible family issue. I don't want to get too into it. It's his business, really.
And
Although
I
I guess,
forgot about it honestly. So
yeah, I guess they announced it. So his wife lost the baby, and I think that we wouldn't expect anybody else to be mentally 100% at this point. If it if they weren't a professional hockey player, like my work wouldn't expect me to show up at this point and just be totally dialed in, right? So I think it could be a combination of things. He could still be a little aggravated from an injury. He could be in the wrong headspace, and we know Kane headspace is a lot for him. When he gets frustrated, when he gets mad, he starts making mistakes. He starts taking dumb penalties. I thought it was funny. Well, that's what I say. I thought it was funny. You said that he
he drew a penalty with Centaur, but he
penalty.
also took a stupid one.
Then turned around and took a stupid one that, and we're going to get into talking a little bit about officiating in general, but he took a penalty that you might say, come on, sometimes you wouldn't call that, but it was still a penalty, and he didn't need to take it right after a penalty kill, like the worst possible time. Okay, you just killed a penalty, you're in the offensive zone, and you take a penalty. Like, thanks.
He's kind of got the bank issue where he's very reckless with his stick. Defensively, he's always whacking away at guys, and you do that, you're going to get slashing calls, and he cross checks quite often. That's what he got called for last night. He's just a little reckless with his stick.
Well, and you and I have talked about a couple high sticks that don't get called that, right, like Kane clearly
high sticks people all the time.
Yeah, and it's not on purpose. It's just like you said, right, he doesn't know where his stick is half the time. So let's get into the Colorado story as a whole, I guess. So Game 5, great win, but honestly needed to come and win it. I think after Game 4, if you come in here and you lose Game 5, I think you're in trouble.
Yeah, Game 5 is always a pivotal game when it's 2-2. Typically whoever wins Game 5 in a 2-2 series will win the series. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I certainly hope it does, but in general, the odd games are typically the most important games. Game 1, 3, 5, and 7 tend to be the turning points, or at least the most critical games. And last night, absolutely. If they lost last night, I don't think they win the series. I do think they win the series now, but it was a critical game by every stretch of the imagination.
But it's been an emotional, at least for the fans, I think, playoff series. I know some people were thinking, "Oh, we're going to win in 4 or 5," but that Game 1 we looked great, and I think Game 1 after that, I was even kind of like, "Hey, I think we have a chance to steal this in 4 or 5 games." But
I thought it was interesting. The first 3 games of the series, it was like every game had 2 games within itself. Like the first game, Colorado dominated the first half, and then the Sharks dominated the second half. The second game was the reverse. The third game switched back to the third game was much like Game 2. The Sharks dominated early, and then Colorado took over late. So the first 3 games, one team couldn't keep the momentum throughout the game. It was almost like a football game, a tale of 2 halves for the first 3 games, which, you do see momentum swings in playoff hockey, but not to that extent typically.
Yeah, and I think the story, to me, has been the 2 goaltenders. As far as if you look at the series as a whole, even the Game 4 where Grubauer has a shutout, I think he stops 32 shots in order to do that.
Which I didn't think. I thought that was the Sharks' worst game of the series. They didn't generate anything, but he has been fantastic. No doubt.
It certainly was. But you put 32 shots on net, you kind of expect one to go in, right? Especially for the Sharks historically. But he's been facing, with the exception of Game 1, he's faced 30 or more shots every game. And we're winning by 1 one goal when we win.
Yeah, he had a career high 38 saves last night, I believe.
Yeah, 38 saves last night, which is
career playoff high anyway. And on the reverse, Jones has been just as good, right?
yeah.
And that's kind of the story of the Sharks playoff, I think, so far is the Martin Jones situation. I mean, we talked a little bit about it after the Vegas series, kind of the dichotomy of how he started that series and how he finished it. And I mean, he has not looked back since Game 4 against Vegas. He turned the tide in Game 5, and ever since then, I mean, he's played. Honestly, I think the best he's ever played is Shark outside of the Stanley Cup final against Pittsburgh. But I think he's almost at that level right now, if not very close to it.
I mean, to give an idea, so we were talking going into the playoffs. He's what, 87 save percentage, 88.
It was like right around 90%, like
Yeah.
899 or 900.
So the 5 games so far against Colorado, he's 92-9, 93. So game 2 where we lose, he's 90, 92, 92, and 95 last night, 95-5. I mean, his save percentage has been ridiculous. He's also just been clutch, right? So even if he's not making a ton of saves, he only had 21 saves last night, but he had saves that were vital, right? They were great shots at a very important time when he's able to make the save and keep the Sharks in the game. And I think that's huge.
I mean, they have minimized the odd man rushes and the breakaways, but I wouldn't say they've minimized the grade A chances in general. I mean, he's made several stops that he would not have made early in the year, at least not as many as he has made. It's so kind of, well, I was kind of thinking the other night, if he was playing like he did in the regular season, I mean, the Sharks, first of all, they wouldn't be playing anymore. It would be over. But the story would have been of how shitty this team has played and how terrible the Sharks looked. And Jones would have gotten some of the blame too, but it's kind of funny what a good goalie performance can do to cover up some of your other failures on the ice.
And I think that's what we talked about, though, right? Was like, what does an elite goalie look like? It's not just the elite goalie is the guy who you're constantly saying, wow, what a great save when his defense falls apart versus his defense falls apart and you go, well, that's not really his fault that the goal went in because, he didn't have it. That's the difference to me. And we're at the point now where we're like, man, do you see that save he made even though his defense fell apart? When they do give up a good opportunity. And I think Steve's asking what changed. Did the goaltender get better, the defense, or both? I think it's both. And the thing I see most from Jones is where he makes one save and he has to slide to the other side of the net to make a secondary save. He used to, during the season, he never made those. He never got across the ice. Now he's able to do that. His positioning game is so much better than it was earlier in the season.
He looks much more calm and confident to me, which he's always been calm in the exterior. He's a very quiet guy in general. He doesn't really say much and tends to look even cool, even though he may not be. But he just looks really confident right now. And I do think it meant a lot to him that DeBoer stuck with him in the Vegas series when probably nobody else would have, honestly.
I certainly wouldn't. I mean, like I admitted this last night, yeah. I would not have kept Jones.
I wouldn't have either, and I don't think most NHL coaches would have, honestly. And I know Dell has struggled this year, so that makes the choice a little bit easier. But I mean, they were down 3-1 in the series. It's not like they had high hopes of coming back at that point. You're sort of in a desperation mode in that situation, and confidence, I think, is the biggest difference, Steve, for Jones. As far as the defense goes, I mean, things obviously tighten up in general in the playoffs, so that's to be expected. But the one major difference on defense has been Vlasic. His play compared to the beginning of the season to now, it's almost the same transformation as Jones. I mean, it's a world of difference. And the way Vlasic and Burns have held down the McKinnon line for most of this series is the reason the Sharks are probably ahead in this series, along with how well Jones has played.
And I have to give it to Burns, who I'm generally not a huge fan of his defensive play. It was funny because when we were watching, I forget which game it was, but Burns made a bad play and Colorado scored, and the TV crew, who we'll talk more about later, said something like, "Oh, an uncharacteristic defensive misplay by Burns. And I'm like, have you not watched Burns play hockey?
Yeah, the national guys, they go, oh, Norris Trophy, therefore. And I think a lot of them know he's not the greatest defensive guy, but they sort of sell that marketing pitch, if you will. Oh, he's a Norris Trophy winner, therefore he must be good defensively.
But he's been better. I mean, I have to admit,
yes.
he's even his starfishing, which we like to point out, like has been properly timed and useful as opposed to just him splayed out across the ice.
Well, I don't know if I'm sure you heard about the comments that Drew Doughty made earlier this year about Burns' defensive lapses and, looking terrible out there 4 or 5 times a night. I'm not going to directly correlate it to that, but I do think the outside sort of criticism has motivated him to be a better player defensively. On the broadcast last night, Joe Micheletti, one of the analysts for NBC Sports Network, or maybe it's Pierre McGuire, one of them, mentioned that on the bench, every time McKinnon jumped on the ice, Burns was telling guys to get off so he could get out there. Like, he wants that challenge, which I don't know if a few years ago if he was in that kind of mindset. So I don't know if it was Doughty's criticism or just his maturation over time. Maybe playing with Vlasic, some of that rubs off on him because that's entirely Vlasic's mantra. But and maybe, too, it's DeBoer saying, hey, we're trusting you to shut down their best players, and it's kind of the Jones thing, gives him confidence that, all right, coach is asking me to take on a role traditionally I haven't played with this team, and I need to step up.
Yeah, and I think Kurz just had an article about Vlasic that I read where Vlasic's thing is he lives for this. I mean, he became a defenseman because he hated goals getting scored against his team. His idol was a huge offensive forward.
I was just reading it.
And then, but the reason he's played defense because he realized, well, I like when I score a goal, that's nice, but I really, really hate when someone else scores a goal. And he lives for these matchups. He lives for getting out there and being the shutdown guy. And I'm wondering if some of that rubs off on Burns, like just the way Vlasic talks about it. If he gets Burnsy hyped about it, and maybe it's a chance for Burns to show everybody, hey, look, I deserve the Norris recognition. I'm not just a guy who shoots the puck. I can also play defense. And we've talked about before, sometimes it just seems like he forgets he's a defenseman and he thinks he's a forward again. If he can keep that defensive mentality, and he's still producing. So I'm really impressed with it.
And I think a lot of his mistakes, like the giveaway and Game 4, that gave Colorado their first goal, which, by the way, he didn't pass that to McKinnon. The other guy intercepted and gave it to McKinnon. I've seen a lot of people misrepresent that play. But anyway, a lot of his misplays, I think, are out of exhaustion. When he's tired, he tends to be mentally fatigued as well, and he kind of makes the lazy play and tries to hit the long pass instead of just making the short, simple play. And some of that, too, is obviously he's an offensively creative guy who's going to try to make plays he shouldn't. But I noticed that when he's exhausted, he tends to make more mistakes, which is to be expected from anyone, really.
And he played his lowest minutes last night out of the series.
Because
and I think
Carlson.
Yeah, I think because Carlson's playing well and he needs it. I mean, he needs a little bit of rest. Like he's almost 29 minutes the last 2 games, game 3 and 4.
Well, they were really leaning heavy on him the first few games against Vegas when Carlson was clearly laboring.
Yeah. And so I think that you're right. I think he's gassed a lot. I think that the thing that I see less of that we always complain about was the jumping up, right? Like I see less of him jumping up on the play to try to make some weird play that is a really low percentage chance that gives up a rush or something. He's been doing a lot less of that and still making a difference from the line.
Yeah. So Steve comments that game 4, the whole team checked out. I'm curious, what did you think of that game, Chad? I mean, I don't know if it was a lack of killer instinct. I mean, certainly I think the long Vegas series started to show up in that game, and the second night of playing in altitude, I think, had a factor as well. I don't think anyone can deny their energy wasn't there, but I was disappointed as a whole that at the end of the day, it's a playoff game. I don't care how fucking tired you are. I would have expected a little bit more that night, especially considering Jones could have stole that game easily.
Yeah.
They had every chance to win that game despite playing horrendous in front of him.
I mean, the shutout, the final score makes it look a lot.
It was only 2-0 that one, I think. If I remember it.
It ended up 3-0, right?
Oh, yes, they got the empty
Yeah,
netter. Yeah.
that's what I'm saying is like the 3-0 score makes it seem like a more dominant. Colorado had a more dominant game than they did. Not that they weren't dominant, but Jones. I mean, Jones held them. I mean, he was keeping the Sharks in the game. I I agree. I think it's a combination of things. I think it's legs and altitude. I think they're exhausted from the series against Vegas. I think a lot of the workhorses are being workhorses. They're being worked more and more time, and they're just tired out there. But I agree. Especially from someone like Logan, who always seems to be able to just say, you know what, F it, it's a playoff game. I'm gonna play better. I didn't see anybody especially on the forward squad, that I thought, oh, okay, they're at least working really hard. There was nobody I had a compliment for other than Jones from that game.
Yeah, nobody stood out other than Jones that night. And Steve kind of gives us a good natural segue here into previewing Game 6, talking about the lack of killer instinct. I think it's critical. Well, let me put it this way. I think the Sharks will find a way to win this series, but I think they would be well served to take care of it tomorrow. Anything can happen in a Game 7. We saw that, obviously, in the first round. I mean, craziest Game 7 you'll ever see.
Yeah.
And I feel like in Game 7, the road team almost has an advantage because they don't have the expectation to win. When you're at home in a Game 7, you're expected to win, and I think that kind of carries weight. And if you get behind early, the crowd starts getting antsy, and the nerves kick in a lot quicker, whereas if you're on the road, you kind of just stick with it and keep your head down. You know the crowd's going to be against you. It's a much simpler mindset, in my opinion.
Well, I think you don't know. Let's say you win. Let's say the Sharks win, whether it's 6 or 7, right? 6, you get at least an extra day's rest.
Yeah, that's the other critical piece.
Because you know the Dallas Blues game, right? You know, if that goes to 7 and you finish in 6, you're getting a good time to rest.
I mean, that series could end today. So that series ends today, and you take it till Wednesday, and that's an extra 3 days of rest they got on you.
And if you look on the other side, I mean, I'm calling at this point. I think I already did, but I'm saying Carolina gets to the Cup final. They've had 2 sweeps. Those guys are not exhausted. Well,
Carolina did 7. That's the first round. There.
Sorry, 7.
They got swept.
Yeah, but they had a sweep, right? So Carolina's got lots of rest. They're not going to be the exhausted team that's coming out of the West. Well, no, I mean, I think no matter who comes out of the West, they're going to be more tired than Carolina does if they come out of the East. I guess it'll depend on who they play. If Boston wins, I think Boston might beat up Carolina a little bit.
Here at the end of the show. But,
yeah.
So, I mean, as far as Game 6 goes, I mean, I'm not worried about Jones. I don't think he's going to slip back. I saw you were having or somebody responded to one of your tweets last night. It was a Colorado fan I looked that was saying, it's going to continue. So, I mean, that explains it. A Colorado fan. But I really don't think Jones is going to take a step back at this point. He looks dialed in to me. I don't know if I've ever seen him play this many games in a row this well, other than the Cup final against Pittsburgh. So I'm not worried about the goaltending. I think the power play is going to continue to be critical for them, not just this series, but beyond that if they get there. But I think the power play's got to be a factor tomorrow, assuming they get power plays. The last time they were in, I think the last game was Colorado, and Colorado, they only got like 1 power play the whole game, and then had the whole 5-on-3 that should have been called, but they didn't call the trip on Carlson. They go down and score. We'll get into the rest here in a second.
I think that power play is gonna. I think part of its paths being gone, right? Like that. I think that hurts the team in general. But I think that power play is one of the places where he really shines. So if we can get him back, I don't think he's back this series, but I think looking forward, getting him back will be helpful.
I don't think he plays tomorrow. I could possibly see him playing in a Game 7 if it goes there.
More just a sheer will thing.
Well, they said he's getting close. I definitely think he's out tomorrow. Regardless, I think if they advance, he'll be in their game one next round. I'm pretty sure.
But they got to figure something out. I mean, and they've had some good looking power plays against Colorado, where Grubauer's just been solid and able to stop them. But they've got to keep that up. They can't. I guess the good thing, and I'll knock on wood, is we're not seeing shorthanded goals while we're on power play. So that's an improvement.
It's funny, the broadcast likes to mention Nieto every time on the penalty kill because he had two shorties against Calgary. And Nieto's had a very good series against his old team.
Is that the Long Beach native?
Yeah.
Matt Nieto?
Don't even get me started on that.
So actually, I think so. I almost texted you the other night, but we're both tired of hearing about Matt Nieto. But I do think he's a better fit on that Colorado team. I think his speed makes him work better on that team than on ours.
Yeah, it fits their style of game, and that team is starving for offense outside of the McKinnon line. So, I mean, he can contribute offense inconsistently, but he has potential.
So that would be my other Game 6 necessity is stopping that McKinnon line, keeping it. Yep. So if they can play it like they played it last night, McKinnon had one shot on goal.
Yeah, was it just me or he looked mentally checked out last night?
He was getting beat up. I mean, he was getting, and I think that's what they need to do. He was getting physically,
Haley,
knocked around.
A few cheap shots at him. And
I'm not.
I saw a Twitter montage today of Dylan took a shot at him, and I didn't see who did it, but there was a shift where he was skating off the ice, getting on the bench, and one of the Sharks, I don't know, from the bench reached out and hit him with a stick. I don't know who it was, but probably Kane or Haley, but who knows?
I don't know about that. I'm not a huge fan of that stuff.
No, I'm not either, but it worked. So.
Yeah, but definitely Haley and Dylan were looking for any opportunity to hit him.
Yeah.
And Kane was hitting people too. You had mentioned Kane needs to stop going out there and hitting guys because he's going to draw a penalty here pretty soon.
Well, Haley looked like he.
Haley too, yeah.
Had bounties on people's heads last night. He only played 5 minutes, but every shift he was out there, he looked like he was trying to kill somebody.
But the two games that we lost, McKinnon has 7 shots on goal. Now, only one goes in each case. But I think this is when we get into the media discussion about him too. I'll get more into this. I think the thing is that again, it's not always that he scores a goal that makes him a threat or makes him a problem. It's the fact that he's getting them into the offensive zone. They're spending more time in our offensive zone. There's more shots on Jones. There's more deflections. So he brings more than just scoring a goal to the team. And
you almost go ahead.
I say Vlasic pointed out that it's not just him, right? You have to watch Landeskog and you have to watch Rantanen. You can't just say, okay, let's take McKinnon out and then we'll be fine. Because if you're double teaming him, then you're leaving somebody else open.
Well, and it's been interesting. To start the series, they had McKinnon and Landeskog together and Rantanen on the second line to sort of spread the wealth. And as the series has gone on, they've put them back together because they've struggled to – I wouldn't say they've struggled to generate offense, but they've struggled to score on Jones, which speaks to his strength. But speaking to McKinnon, as you were saying, he's just a threat every time he's out there. You feel like you almost have to play mistake-free hockey when he's on the ice. In a split second, you make one mistake, that puck's in the net. It's the guy's explosive. He's probably the most explosive player in the NHL other than McDavid just because of how quick, not just his feet are, but his hands and his mind. Everything is in sync. And
so I think shutting down that – the other thing is if you're working hard on that line, if you're playing your best forwards against that line, you're playing your best defensemen against that line, you're not playing them against other lines. And then it's just like the Joe Thornton thing where you've got Jumbo playing against, third line defensemen or lower line guys, and that opens it up for him a little bit. If everybody's focusing on McKinnon because he's playing really well, then all of a sudden you're opening up their other lines to get something in.
Yeah. And you have to think that, he knows he had a terrible game last night. There was several shots of him on the bench slamming things and kicking the bench and clearly frustrated. You have to think he's going to look himself in the mirror and play his best game on Monday, or at least certainly be motivated to. So I think you're right that being able to control that line, and then as I talked about the power play, I think are going to be the two keys to the game
Yeah.
Monday. Special teams in general, and then if they can contain that line like they did last night.
And I'd say one other thing I noticed last night. So the I think the second hurdle goal, because the first hurdle goal was the power play, right? So
Yeah.
it was just a basic tip. I mean, it was a play you diagram up and you try a million times. But the second one was him getting behind Grubauer. And I think that's actually not a bad idea, is to set someone on that other side and take shots from take shots from left, set someone up on the right, because he's so hard to get pucks past, but he does give up rebounds.
Yeah,
And I
they're not
think
scoring too often on the first shot for sure.
yeah. So if you get a guy over off to the side, let him make a rebound and then, try to scoop it in. Once I saw that play happen, I was like, that actually might be one of the keys to getting around this guy, is just, you're not looking for the tip necessarily. You're just shooting it at him. And then you have a guy there to pick up any rebound that comes out.
Yeah. It was good to see Bertle get back on track. He was great in the Vegas series, but he struggled this series against Colorado up until last night. So hopefully that continues. And along with Couture, they should carry the weight. Did my video black out on your end?
No, you're good.
I don't know why it keeps doing that on my end. But anyway, so that's kind of the Colorado series. I think we've gotten through most of that. The next, we were going to talk about injuries, but we already kind of covered Carlson. We talked a little bit about Pavelski. Is there anything else there that
just
touch on?
It was a huge thing last night, him coming out and just throwing in a rally towel, right? I mean, people who were there were commenting about how it was, as louder than the goal scored in Game 7, right? That he's such a part of the heart of this team. If we go to 7 and he's not playing, I hope he opens the door, kind of thing. Like, I hope he's there as the face to remind them, hey, this is what we're playing for. Because he just riled them up. And even Couture was saying they didn't know he was going out there, but when they heard the crowd and then they look up, like he looks up at the Jumbotron, it's like, oh, okay, of course, Pavs is out. And that kind of gives everybody a little bit of a spark, right? Just to see that.
Well, we kind of talked about it a little bit as far as me guessing he'll play Game 7 if there is one, which, knock on wood, hopefully there's not. That could be part of it too. Like you said, they may just stick him in there to give the guys a boost and sort of an extra spark, which, obviously you don't risk his health, but if he's kind of borderline questionable, that might be the determining factor.
And then the one we didn't talk about was Donskoy coming back,
Right.
which I actually think I liked Donskoy's play. I'm a Donskoy fan. I've said that multiple times on here. I always like his play, but even when he's not scoring goals, the guy's aggressive. He skates in, he'll take on 3 guys, he'll go for the puck. He tries to dig it out and get it to hurdle and opens up opportunities that way.
Well, that's what I was saying. He's a hard guy to dislike because the effort's always there. He's always one of the hardest working guys on the ice. He may not always produce or generate much, but you can never question his effort. He's always working his ass off. And the reason he gets hurt so much is because he puts himself in vulnerable positions, which part of that is he's fearless, partially probably stupid in some situations. But, when they replayed that hit he took from McNabb last night, I still don't know how he's back. I know he missed a week or so, but yeah, that was probably the biggest hit of the playoffs that I've seen that was a clean hit.
Well, and he had an assist last night. He's working hard.
Yeah.
I feel bad for the guy because I think it'll be like Timo. I think if he gets a goal, it'll do a lot to boost his confidence and he'll be back in. But I gotta hand it to him. He never gives up. Steve was saying we should fly in the fathers if there's a Game 7. Just get all the Shark dads, in, and I lost him.
Now I'm back.
Can I get a verification? Oh, there you are. You're back.
Yeah, I don't know why it kicked me out, but I was saying the Sharks' wives I think go to every game, or at least a lot of wives and girlfriends for those who aren't married. But they have a whole group that goes to the games and coordinates outfits and all that stuff. Um, can you see my video, Chad?
I can see your video. Is he still black screen, Steve?
He may be delayed slightly from the live broadcast.
Yeah, I do feel like, though, whenever I see the dads come in, I don't know, the guys play a little harder. They just pull out all the stops if there's a game 7. Bring out the dad,
Right.
have halves out there either opening the door or playing. I don't know.
John Scott, let him open the door. I want to see it happen.
Yeah, I listened to Drop in the Gloves, both the one where he was talking about Jumbo texting him and saying, "Hey John, like, hey Scott, we need you to Big." Calls him Big, I guess. So, hey Big, we need you to come and play one game.
Right.
And how he sounded so juiced about the idea of, like,
I mean, can you imagine Jumbo's face walking out of the door seeing John Scott? I mean, he would fucking lose his shit. Like,
yeah, he would. But also I heard his interview with Goodrow, which was, I mean, it was good. It was cool of Goodrow to call. He literally just, like, gets out of practice and, like, calls John Scott because John had texted him and jumps on the show, which was really cool. It's cool to listen to John Scott's show if you haven't.
There was he had an episode with Alex Stalock a few months back where they went through some of their old Shark stories and talked about the captaincy change from Thornton Pavelski, and there's a whole story where they had the team vote on who should be next captain, and all the guys still voted for Jumbo, and then the organization still decided to give it to Pavelski anyway. So they talked about that. But anyway, getting back on track, I do miss Drew Raminda as well, Steve. I always loved Drew and was sad when he left. Maybe he'll come back at some point. All right, getting back on track. So we wanted to talk about kind of the two things that Sharks fans and really NHL fans in general love to bitch about. Anytime their team is in the playoffs. So the first one is the broadcasters and the television coverage of the series. And for this case, we'll talk about the McKinnon coverage. I myself was tweeting about it the other night, but what have been your thoughts on the bias, or do you think it's fair coverage of McKinnon in this series by NBC Sports?
I think so. I think McKinnon's the best individual athlete left in the playoffs.
Correct.
And so I think that's why he gets the attention he gets. If McDavid was in, it'd be McDavid, right? Like,
right.
And I think the other problem is that Colorado doesn't have a whole lot else to talk about.
That's very true.
So when people have been saying that they're not covering the Sharks. I don't think that's true. I hear them say a lot of nice things about the Sharks. I mean, they talked about Burns' butt check that who did it send out?
Matt Calvert.
Yeah, so they were talking about, like, an earth-moving hit was, like, how big of a hit they were talking. They've talked up a lot of the Sharks players as well. I think the difference is on the Sharks team, you have a lot of people to talk about. You know, when Timo's playing well, you talk about Timo. When Hurdle's shooting, you talk about how great Hurdle is.
And they have given coverage to Cale Makar, the rookie defenseman for the Habs.
Yeah, true.
Had never played an NHL game until the playoffs.
But, and I think deservedly. I mean, for a guy who, he's played, 5 games now?
Yeah.
He's been playing extremely good defense for somebody who comes in like that. But I actually think the loser in this is Grubauer. I mean, I feel like they've barely talked about him.
Yeah.
And he's been way more important to your team this series.
He's been their best player this series by far.
For sure. Way more important than McKinnon has this series. But I don't know how yes, I think they talk about him too much. I think that always happens, right? If you have Sidney Crosby or you have McDavid, or in this case McKinnon, you have some guy who's one of the elite players in the NHL, then they talk about him a lot. They love to watch him.
Well, that's what I was going to say. They keep in mind, I mean, they're basically working for the NHL to an extent, right? I mean, they have a contract with the NHL. The NHL wants their star players marketed, so they almost have an obligation to really lift those guys up and put them on a pedestal, which is exactly what's happening. That being said, it makes it very annoying to listen to as an opposing fan and frustrating. But I do agree with you that for the most part, I think the coverage is based off how the game is going. If the Sharks are in the lead, it's oh man, the Sharks are great. If Colorado's in the lead, oh man, Colorado's the best team in the world. I don't know how anyone's going to beat them. I just think it's exaggerated is the issue, right? Like
Sure.
based off who is ahead in the game, suddenly this team is playing lights out and the other team sucks balls. Like it's just so exaggerated is the issue I have.
But no one drinks water like like McKinnon. Have you seen that guy drink water? I mean, it's so amazing.
Well, the comment that really made me laugh the other night, they were talking about McKinnon and, oh man, before the game, he answers every question from the media. Like, oh, congratulations. Wow.
Well, I mean, I
what
guess
an impressive trait to have. Like, come on.
But if you're comparing him to interviewing Vlasic, I guess that's a major.
Yes, but I mean, Vlasic's an exception, right? Most NHL guys are pretty decent about that. But I thought that was funny.
Yeah, I mean, what set me off last night, like I think I texted you this, but the first few games I was kind of like, I'm just chalking it up to he's the guy he's the talent that's out on the ice, right? The most talented guy. And he is impressive to watch. If you're watching especially Game 4, if you watch Game 4 and you don't think Nathan McKinnon was unstoppable, you're crazy. Now, he only got one goal, but he skated anywhere he wanted on the ice. He took the puck anywhere he wanted to take it. And it's hard not to talk about that when it's happening. Right. But then last night at the beginning of the game, they do Nathan McKinnon,
preview of the game,
preview feature about how great he's been. And he hasn't been great over the course of the series.
No. His overall numbers look fine. I mean, I had it written down here. He's got 3 goals and 2 assists in this series, but it was largely from Game 4, that you talked about. He did have a goal in Games 2 and 3 as well, but he has not been a difference maker in this series. Has he been their best player on offense? Absolutely.
Sure.
But you expect him to be, right? But he hasn't been the dominant force that he was against Calgary. And I think they're sort of looking at what he did to Calgary, and then they look at his total point numbers, and they're kind of pushing that story onto this series when it hasn't really been the case.
Well, and what got me was that to be, I don't know if it's to be balanced or what, but they spotlight a Sharks player.
Right.
But who do they choose? They choose Hertl instead of, which last night I think Hertl almost stepped up to it. I swear Hertl watched it and was like, oh,
there you go. They're going back to the round 1 storyline, right?
Yeah. But they didn't talk about, to me, Couture's the storyline for this series.
Offensively.
Offensively. If you're going to talk about one of their forwards, you talk about the guy who scored a hat trick to single-handedly win that game. I mean, so I don't know if there's a little bias there. I don't know if it was a thought, like I always talk about Hertl being the one of the best forwards that they have, and maybe it was just let's feature the young guy who's the young talent or what, but yeah.
I will say I can't stand Pierre McGuire. He's probably my least favorite NHL broadcaster in the world. If you watch his post-game interviews, he gets awkwardly close to anyone he's interviewing. It's like a fangirl with every single NHL player. He touches them and practically pets them, and it's just awkward. And some of them have like okay, let's back away a little bit.
I like some of the gifs of like people backing away from Pierre McGuire.
I think it's called. But,
and I mean, at least he hasn't told anybody which side of the ice, which teams are on this time.
She opened the door last night, by the way.
Yeah, she did.
Coin.
Which actually, that's an interesting.
I thought it was so. We won't go into that story, but
okay.
I will say, what did you think of her opening the door? I thought it was. I don't know if it was a political statement based off the women's protest that's going on.
I think it was partially.
Which would make sense in the Bay Area. I mean, very politically motivated part of the country. But I thought it was kind of weird to have her open the door. I don't have any issue with her. I think she's great, but there's no Sharks affiliation there was my confusion with it.
Hey, or Bay Area, or
is she from the Bay Area? Maybe she is.
I don't know. Maybe like usually it's an athlete from the Bay Area or someone.
Yeah, there was no Sharks tie other than she was at the All-Star game this year, which was in San Jose. But
yeah. So, but I like what she's done. I mean, I thought she was very good doing commentary for NHL. but yeah, I think a big part of it was the whole. For those who don't know, basically a lot of the women hockey players are essentially going on strike. They're not calling it a strike, but they're boycotting playing for any professional teams because they're not getting paid as much as
Which the
what they think they're worth.
Dutch women's soccer team did that as well a couple years ago, and it worked. So
Yeah, and it might like I said, like you said, I don't want to go too far into it only because I think it's a much longer discussion than we really have time for at this point.
yeah.
But I think that's part of the reason why she was invited on, and maybe because creepy Pierre Maguire was around. So,
Who would you want to see open the doors next game, Steve? Whether it's Game 7 or Game 1 of the conference finals, because there will be another game at SAP Center guaranteed this year. Who would your nominee be, Chad, to open the doors for the Sharks?
well, like I said, if Pavs isn't playing, I think it's Pavs.
Right.
If Pavs is playing, did Dougie open? Did Crankshaft open the door already?
Him and Setaguchi did it together.
Um, I don't know. I think John Scott's a good answer. I think, you know, I'm trying to think of another former Shark that I would pull up, but I don't like when other athletes do from other sports.
It's funny because that's where I was going to go.
I figured you were, but like I don't. So for those who don't know me, which is most people probably listening to this, I'm not a huge fan. I don't watch other sports very much. I'll watch football. I can't stand watching basketball anymore, and baseball I can only watch live because it puts me to sleep otherwise. But I guess how's Golden State doing?
They are up 2-1 in their series against Houston in the second round. So Steve proposes Owen Nolan. I think that's a great idea if you're going the Sharks alumni side. I would love to see Dan Boyle just because he was one of my all-time favorites. Did Chichu do it already? If not, I would throw him in the mix. I want to say he did it one of the games. If you go regional athletes, then Steph Curry would obviously be the biggest name you could possibly get, and it's tough because their schedules are, combined right now. But if they have some off time, that would be cool to see Steph Curry, and he's repped some Sharks gear walking into games and stuff for the Warriors.
Some of the Niners were at last series too. I think that's one thing I like about the Bay Area sports is they all try to show up and kind of support each other cross sport. And I don't think if you're an athlete, I don't think you can look at hockey players and not have respect for their athleticism. So it's not surprising to me that we get support from all of the other sides. So, but so we got off track again. Happens a lot, everybody. So besides the TV coverage, which we talked about, so the other complaint from all NHL fans everywhere is NHL officiating. So I kind of commented this morning on Twitter that every NHL fan agrees that the officiating is terrible and that it only ever impacts them negatively.
It's the truest statement as far as playoff hockey is concerned. I mean, every fan base thinks that the other team is being favored by the league and that it's rigged and it's biased. And certainly I think the Sharks have had their fair share of valid complaints over this playoff and past playoffs, but it's difficult to legitimize that conversation when every single team feels the same way.
And so let's actually talk about the big one from last night. And I think there's a lot of confusion around it.
Yes, there was.
And I tried to clear some up both on Twitter and on some of the Facebook stuff. But so LeBanc.
Yes, LeBanc. He's not French. He's from New York.
But I see it, and I think
French it's totally a French name, even though he's not. Yeah.
So LeBanc scores a goal. Everybody's cheering. All of a sudden, the officials are for some reason skating over to the booth and put on the headphones, and everybody's kind of just curious what the hell's going on.
Right.
And I had seen that in real time. I had noticed the high stick that they end up calling, but I didn't see a hand go up. I didn't see anything, and everybody's argument is, how the hell can they review that as part of a goal, right?
Yeah.
And a shout out to Twitter, which very quickly had a screen grab up showing that the back judge did, or back ref does have his hand up before the goal goes into the net. And I think that when people ask what's reviewed, I think that's what's being reviewed. They're looking at timing.
They're reviewing the timing. So since they made a penalty call on the ice, they weren't reviewing whether it was a penalty or not. They had already decided the penalty took place. The question was the penalty called before or after the goal, and that's what they were reviewing, which evidently is reviewable.
Which makes sense, right? Because if the high stick happens after the puck goes into the net, it had no bearing on it. Then the goal's good, and you.
Which I believe, let's say they had determined the penalty was after, Colorado would have still got a power play. It's just the goal would have counted. So the penalty was going to happen regardless, just a matter of whether the goal would count or not.
And then the other part of it was there was some question as to if you watch the play. It looks like a questionable high stick. I think it comes off his helmet. Some people don't think it touches him at all, right? Well, but he falls back and grabs his face. And
there's that aspect, and then it also looks like Barry lifts Meyer's stick towards Brandon. I don't think he actually touched him based off the replays I saw this morning, but different angles make you think different things.
Now, by the rule book, because I did look this up because I was curious. So by the rule book, a stick lift does not negate a high stick.
That's what I figured. Yeah.
So the only thing that negates a high stick is if it's in your
follow through on a shot
or a wind up on a normal shot. So like when you see Jumbo slap at things or people slap at things, that can be a high stick because that's not a normal wind up shot, right? So my questions that I had is, and the answer is no, it's not reviewable whether or not it was a high stick, unfortunately. Because to me, if you're going back and you're looking at it to determine timing, you could also look at it to determine, was it actually a penalty? Which they don't do. That's not something
they don't do because then everyone would want to review every penalty, right? So.
And that brings up and I've seen it a lot from commentators, from former hockey players, from just people on Twitter, but what do you think about expanding review? What first off, should we expand review at all? And if so, what things should be reviewable?
I don't think penalties should be reviewable, even major penalties. What I do think should be reviewable is every single goal or non-goal call. It shouldn't have to be goaltender interference or offsides in order to review a goal. Every single situation that leads to either a goal or non-goal call should be reviewable. Like every scoring play in the NFL is reviewed. It should be the same idea.
And I guess we should clarify. So there's a difference between reviewable and challengeable too, because the Toronto reviews every goal. So I read about this. Toronto actually looks at every single goal.
But I think there's only certain things they can overturn for.
Yeah. So there's only certain things they can overturn for, and there's only certain things that a coach can challenge. I think they can only challenge interference, and they can't even challenge a kick, can they?
Not anymore. It used to be. Well, it can't be challenged, but it's one of the things the NHL can look at to determine whether there was a distinct kicking motion.
And that's where I think there needs to be some clarification, right? To me, if it's reviewable, if it's something that can overturn a goal, it should be something that a coach can challenge. And it should be something automatically reviewed by Toronto.
And I don't remember the specific instances, but I know the Sharks had a few this year where they clearly scored and it wasn't reviewable for whatever reason. So there are still some gaps and loopholes where there are situations where a goal has been scored and they still can't do anything about it. I think it might be the intent to blow situation, but whatever the situation is, you should be able to fix a goal or a non-goal regardless of the fucking rule book.
But I think this is the second for the Sharks. This is the second time in the playoffs that a penalty that happened before a goal caused a goal that went in to not be a good goal, right? So we had the terrible goaltender interference, which again, they can't review whether or not it happened, right? If they called it on the ice, then it.
That one I don't know because, I mean, they can review for goaltender interference. So, I mean, at the same time, aren't you assessing whether it's a penalty or just incidental? So, I don't know. And the problem, too, is the official press statements they release in-game after those types of plays are as vague as possible. Like last night's literally told you nothing. It said, hey, this was reviewed and it was determined a penalty occurred on the play. Okay, that
Yeah.
tells us nothing about what you were actually reviewing.
Thank you. Yeah, at this time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Which that's
so
probably intentional, but some more transparency would be nice.
agreed. And more apologies, I think. I think they needed to send out more apologies. Now, that still begs the question, and I think the answer is 100% yes. Is any or are officials? I guess it's not a yes or no question. Are officials that bad, or are fans that biased? Actually, it is yes. It's yes to both. I think officiating is
sure.
bad,
Yeah.
but I think that we're all a little biased. We're much more likely to notice when there should have been a call that would have helped us and it didn't happen than we are to notice. Like you and I talked about the high sticks we see from Kane that don't get called. I think most fans aren't seeing those. They're not even noticing them. But they notice any play that comes from a Colorado Avalanche player that they feel like should have been a penalty.
Most fans do not see missed calls on their own team, or I tend to see it both ways. Granted, it's still more slanted towards the Sharks, but and I do think the officiating in these playoffs has not been good. But I think people also underestimate how difficult that job is. Like, if you've ever sat down in the lower level, close to the ice, like 1 or 2 rows from the glass, your head is like snapping back and forth watching them play. Now try watching 10 guys on the ice at the same time that are moving at rapid pace when you're at eye level with them. Yeah. It's a very difficult job, and it's easy for us to see the replay and correct it. They don't get the advantage of replay in those situations. So
right. Well, last night's call, right? So people are like, why is it the back ref making the call? Well, the guy in the front's watching the net because there's a goal being shot. That's his job. And if the guy in back's the only one that sees it, he's got to raise his hand and make the call. Now, it's harder to judge from where he's at, but he sees what he thinks is a penalty. He's got to call it. Yeah. But yeah, we've talked about that before. We sat really close and we decided that actually we want to be further back. I don't mind the first level, lower level, but I want to be 13, 14 rows back because when you're up close, you don't see as much of the game. And I think that they have that same problem, right?
Yeah. You sit upstairs compared to downstairs in the game. Looks like it's 2 times slower than it is down there. And it's the same way on TV. It's still fairly fast on TV, but nowhere near as fast as it is at that level where the refs are.
And having been, I didn't play much, but having been on the ice in a game type scenario, like it's hard to even have, when you're down there playing, it's hard to even have a view of everything that's going on. So, I mean, those guys they have a difficult job. I think I'll be nice. And referees in every sport have a difficult job. They're making calls.
The NBA especially. Oh my God, the fucking acting show. If anyone's watched the Golden State Houston series, I mean, trying to call fouls in basketball is ridiculously difficult.
Yeah, and you're making calls. We always have the benefit of seeing it in slow motion, right? And usually, if fans are honest, they didn't catch it in real time. They're like, oh, there's a penalty. Where was the penalty? And then they show it in slow motion, and then they're like mad that they don't think it was a penalty.
Now, I do have 2 bones to pick with the referees. I'm trying to remember the second one. The first one is that there's a different rule book in the regular season and the playoffs.
Absolutely.
And it changes from game to game. Some games they call it tight. Some games they call it close. Penalties are penalties. Call it the same fucking way the entire season. I don't understand this concept that the rule book suddenly gets thrown out in the playoffs. I get it. You don't want to decide the game, but if it's a penalty, it's a penalty. And then that's where a lot of these controversies come in because all game they're not calling anything, and then they finally make a call, and the team is like, well, what about the 12 other things that you let go the rest of the game?
Exactly.
And that's what creates the issue when you basically decide in advance, okay, we're only going to call really egregious stuff, then it becomes even more subjective.
Well, and you call them in game-changing moments because you don't want to affect the game. It doesn't make sense, right? Like I don't want them to score a goal when there was a penalty because that will mean we affected the course of the game.
And that's the second one that drives me nuts. They will not call penalties when a team has a man advantage, especially in the playoffs. Given a 5-on-3 in the playoffs, you have to murder someone to get one.
And I think they need to. There's 2 penalties, especially to me. They really need to clarify rules and what it is. One is goaltender interference, which everybody complains about, but the other is cross-check because when is it a cross-check and when is it not?
Right.
First off, there's 100 cross-checks a game.
Yeah.
and they call maybe one. I think it's the least
Mhm.
called. To me, it's the least called penalty. And I get why the guys don't understand what they're allowed to do, because if I'm getting cross checked all
Yeah.
game and it's never getting called, I'm going to
It
start
seems to be
checking back.
based off how violent the reaction is from the guy who receives it. That seems to be the determining factor. Did you see the flop situation in the Dallas St. Louis series where
Oh God!
Elias
And
Lindell of Dallas got cross-checked 3 times in a row and acted like a soccer player?
I mean, by the book, those were cross checks.
And I think
That's my other
they
thing. Is
did
like,
they did call one of them, I believe, but
no, they called him. Oh, I thought they called him for
I think they
embellishment.
called him and a cross-check.
Yeah, they went to 4-on-4, I think.
Yeah, but I mean that was the biggest flop I've ever seen in hockey. If the Sharks end up playing Dallas, I swear to God, if that guy pulls that, I'm gonna jump on the ice and punch him myself.
Well, especially like the first one, I thought, okay, maybe he's off balance, right? Because that
Mm-hmm.
happens. You're not on balance and you get a cross check. But then he gets up and immediately goes back down, and then gets up and
Right.
immediately goes. You know the guy's there and he's going to cross check you. So
Yeah.
at that point, it was completely a soccer player move.
I would have been tempted to cross-check him in the face at that point to let him know how a real penalty feels.
But then that's a 5, and you're definitely going, yeah.
So those are my issues with the officials: the inconsistency from regular season to playoffs, and then
Even within the game,
yeah, that too. Yeah,
that's one of the things you and I talk about a lot. Is if they don't call it on the other team, I'm okay with that as long as they don't call it on us, or vice versa. Like I will be the first to admit that there's times Sharks get away with penalties that they shouldn't get away with. I think they should call that evenly. But the problem with that is, if you can't even do it within a game, how are you going to ever do it within the NHL as a whole?
and I guess the one time I can understand them sort of putting their whistles away is playoff overtime. But I mean, then you're kind of being a hypocrite if you say, well, it's okay then, but not the
Yeah.
rest of the game. But I get it more in that situation.
And it's not something that just we see. I mean, every single commentator says, "Yeah, that's playoff hockey.
Everybody
They're not
knows
going to
it.
they're not going to
Yeah.
call the penalty. Like, they know it. It's almost official that it's a different rule book when you get into the playoffs. I mean, Bettman hasn't come out and said it, but that's about the.
And I think the league's response would be, oh, it gets more physical in the playoffs, and we don't want to take that away. But you can play physical without taking penalties. It's not easy, but it's possible.
Well, they got to get away from, as much as this would hurt hurt the Sharks this playoffs, but they've got to get away from penalizing the outcome versus penalizing the actual penalty. There's a lot of clean hits that get called penalties because guys go down.
And you see it too because the ref doesn't put his arm up, then he sees the guy down the corner. Oh, penalty! It's like, no, come on. If you didn't think it was a penalty to start, it's not a penalty because he's down.
Well, and I've seen some of the opposites where it's clearly an elbow to the head or like a shoulder to the head, but the guy shakes it off, and so they just don't call it.
Yeah. You got to see what you call. You can't base it off the reaction, which is why Vegas was so pissed off about some of the penalties in that series. But all right, so we'll wrap up with kind of going around the league, which has been our sort of wrap-up topic the last few shows. So kind of going series by series, and then we can cover any overall thoughts. Carolina and the Islanders, that was a sweep. Most of the games were close, but I think the Islanders, their lack of talent up front finally caught up to them. I mean, you look at that roster, and they're pretty thin as far as talent outside of Barzell and Andersley. And Carolina certainly is riding the high right now, which you predicted would continue, and that certainly seems to be what happened.
Yeah, I think, for the Islanders, goaltending fell apart. I mean, it didn't fall apart. Like, it wasn't like a total collapse of goaltending, but that was what they had, I think, keeping them going. And Carolina is able to get some goals past them. And like you said, the Islanders aren't strong enough on offense to make up for that. Carolina, man, I every time Don Cherry opens his mouth, I feel like it just rouse them up more. He talked about him again the other day.
Yeah, saying their fans are bandwagon. Yeah.
Oh, he was also saying like, you notice they don't do their celebrations in the playoffs. That's because they know what they were doing was wrong. And like
Don
going off
Cherry is
on.
like the classic stubborn old man, right? Where
Oh
he's
yeah,
never going to be in wrong, so he's just going to keep digging that grave deeper until they get knocked out.
yeah, he's the old man yelling at kids to stay off his lawn, and I think that the problem with Don Cherry to me is like, and I hope Carolina wins the East, and if for some reason the Sharks don't make it to the finals, I hope Carolina wins the cup, and I hope Don Cherry has a stroke from the amount of anger he
I
feels.
hope they get there too for selfish reasons. So I have a brother in North Carolina who is really good at schmoozing with famous people, and
Yeah,
he's friends with a few former Carolina Hurricane players. So he was had a suite to Game 4 when they swept the Islanders. So if the Sharks and Carolina meet in the finals, I should be able to get tickets in
well,
Carolina to
you're
go
not
see
too
it.
far now, right?
No, it's like 5 or 6 hours away.
That's not bad.
Um,
Let me know. I'll get it. I'll fly out there.
yeah, so that would be cool. And also, I think on paper, Carolina's the worst team in the East left. They certainly, the danger though is that team believes right now, right? And
Correct.
they're riding a high. So on paper, they're not very good, but it's a dangerous matchup if that happens. So
And I think their future is going to depend a lot on the next matchup, right? Boston versus Columbus. If Columbus finds a way to win, I think Carolina can handle them fairly easily. If they don't and Boston knocks them out, then I think it's going to be a rough. It's going to be a rough conference final for Carolina against Boston.
yeah. So speaking of that series, I think that's been the best series in the second round so far as Boston and Columbus, especially yesterday's game. Um, the last 10 minutes of the game, I think, had 5 goals. So Columbus was down by 2. They come back and tie it in the final few minutes, and then Boston scores a goal with a minute 30 left to retake the lead. And that series has been, it feels like a heavyweight fight. And they even said it on the broadcast last night. Columbus probably deserves a better fate in that series than the position they're in right now. But I agree with John Tortorella, who pretty much guaranteed a Game 7. I think that series will go the full 7 games, and it could go either way. I think it's a coin toss if it does reach a Game 7.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know if Columbus. I mean, Boston's a physical team, and I didn't know if Columbus would be able to withstand that. But they've done a good job. And I mean, it's Tortorella, so he's never been a guy to shy away from having a physical team himself.
Yeah.
But I'm impressed with what they've done. I mean, you and I both thought when they started making trades, we thought it was ridiculous because why are you like you're not going to make it to the playoffs, or if you do, you're not going to go anywhere. But it's paid off. I mean, between the trades they made and Tortellini, it's gone really well.
I'll have to invite John Scott on the show to share his thoughts on that.
I'll text him and.
But Steve asked, who would you rather play, Boston or Columbus? That's a tough question because Columbus is a very, very difficult building to win in on the road, especially if you look back at the Sharks' regular season record in Columbus the last 10 years. It's probably the worst of any building they've played in the NHL, or at least up there with places like Vegas. So it's a very hostile environment. Any Tortorella team, as you just kind of touched on, is extremely physical, which the Sharks. The thing is, the Boston's a physical team too.
Yeah,
so
either way, you're getting a physical.
either way, you're screwed on that side, which is going to be an issue for the Sharks if they get there because they're going to be beat to crap by that point. So I think either would be a tough matchup, but I'd rather play Columbus just because Boston's a better team on paper.
I agree. I think Boston's a better team, and I think if they make it past Columbus, they realize that to some extent. Does that make sense? Like they go, okay, one, we can't take anyone for granted.
I mean, they just played 7 against Toronto, but they play 7 against Toronto every year, so it's kind of routine for them. But
Yeah, I mean, I don't want. So while I want to see them play Carolina, I'd like to see Carolina make it through. I would say that whoever makes out of Columbus, Boston, and then plays again in the conference finals, that's the same kind of path we're taking. So I'd rather play one of those teams that's played 2 7-game series and is or 2 or maybe even 3 and is a little beat up by the time they get to the finals versus someone who's had so much time to rest. But that's a tough question. I would say I'd say Carolina too, or sorry, Columbus. Out of those two choices,
Yeah.
but I guess the bigger question is in the West, St. Louis versus Dallas. So,
Yeah.
one, what do you think is going to happen? And two, who would you rather play?
I don't really have a preference who to play because I think they both. I mean, I think the Sharks are the better team than both of those teams. I guess I would rather play Dallas just because we played St. Louis in the conference finals the last time we went to the Cup, so I feel like it's going to be hard to beat the same team again in the conference finals just because of how numbers work and how luck plays into things. So for that reason alone, I'd want to play Dallas, and I think Dallas is much thinner up front than St. Louis. I mean, Dallas, if you play them, it's going to be a similar story to the Colorado series where, okay, you shut down Ben and Sagan, and then the rest of their lineup is not very good. So it would basically factor down to Vlasic and Burns again getting assigned to a team's top line, and after that, the Sharks' depth should, play better.
Yeah, I actually think I'd rather play the Blues. I'm gonna go with Steve's comment here. One is that I don't want to play anybody. Oh, this negates me wanting to play Carolina, but I'm worried about playing anybody with a chip on their shoulder at this point. Because through most of the playoffs, if you have a chip on your shoulder, that gets you through to the next game. And St. Louis, I don't feel like has as much to prove as Dallas feels like they do, especially that Sagan line. But like you said, it's a very similar style if you play them to what we're playing now. You focus Vlasic and Burns on taking in that line, and then count on your offense to get you through. I have a little bit of a selfish reason. I have a Facebook friend who's a St. Louis fan, and he's been rooting for the Sharks the whole way through, and so I've agreed to root for St. Louis all the way through until we get to the conference finals.
Here's the other factor. If we play Dallas, we get to see Roman Polak every day. Which
That's not
how in the world is he still in the NHL is my question. But I'm just imagining the Sharks exposing him on defense would be a nice treat to see. But
yeah, I guess I should always pick. I guess I should always pick to play the team that has Roman Polak on it. But yeah, I don't know either. Hey, if you ask Kurz, he had a lot of.
I mean, he is a physical player, which could pose an issue for a beat-up Sharks team. But yeah, I mean, skating-wise, you have to be able to skate in the NHL these days, and he's definitely not in that mold for sure.
So yeah, I think. Who do you think wins it? I guess would be the.
Well, going in, I picked St. Louis, but I don't think Dallas is going to lose 2 games in a row. They're up 3-2 at this point. I don't know if they put it away today, but if they lose today, I think they go on the road and win. That whole series, the road teams have dominated. So who has home ice really means nothing in that series. So I think the fact that Dallas has 2 shots at it, I'm going to give them the odds because they got 2 shots to win it.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna agree. I think Dallas wins it. As much as I'd like to see St. Louis, I think at this point Dallas just has the upper hand. Like you said, they get a game at home, and then even if they don't win that, they get a chance to go win it on the road. And yeah. So are you still think Sharks make it all the way through, regardless of who they have to play?
I do. I mean, honestly, I think getting through this Colorado series is going to be the bigger hurdle in the next round. I think Monday is critical. I'm concerned about a possible Game 7 in San Jose just because anything can happen in a Game 7. So I would really, really like to see them win Monday. I don't even necessarily care about the rest as much as I do. I don't want to risk a Game 7.
Understand.
So,
all right. Well, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I was kind of after the game last night. I was sitting there thinking, we're 1 win away from going to the conference final, and yet I feel like this team has so much more potential than what they've showed so far these playoffs. I mean, we've kind of talked about it. The guys that have showed up are Hurdle, Couture, Burns, Carlson, Vlasic, and Jones, which that's 6 guys. That's quite a number, but they've gotten nothing from Kane. Timo, while he's produced chances, hasn't generated offense in terms of actual points very consistently. Pavelski is out. When he was in, he was not a factor whatsoever, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
Sorensen has struggled. LeBanc and Thornton have been good off and on. They haven't been consistent, which I guess you would expect from the depth guys. And their power play has been horrendous for every game except for those 5 minutes in Game 7, which was an entire different experience. That had nothing to do with power play hockey. That was entirely motivation for Pavelski. So you think about that. Their power play has sucked. Their penalty kill was very bad against Vegas, too. It's been better against Colorado. But if your special teams have not been good and 3 of your main guys, Timo, Pavelski, and Kane, have done very little, I mean, I'm just imagining how good this team could be if everything clicks.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think power play is one of the biggest things for us. If our power play was even as good as it was during the season, I think this series would be over already.
Yeah.
Because we would have won Game 2 or game. Well, I don't think we would have won Game 4, but we would have won Game 2. And I think Vegas would have been done sooner if our power play was as good as it was during the regular season.
Certainly wouldn't have gotten in a 3-1 hole.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
So, I mean, if they can get that worked out somehow, and I don't know how you do it. I mean, I don't know if it's a problem with is it a coaching problem at this point? Because it doesn't seem like it's a talent problem. I don't know what you do, but someone's got to figure out the power play, because I think going into the finals and especially the Stanley Cup final, if you can't score on the power play, you're in trouble. I mean, you have to take advantage of those opportunities in order to win.
There's very few teams that have won the Cup with having a bad power play in the playoffs. It's happened, but it's not very often. And Dominic, to clarify what I was saying about Pavelski, I do agree he's a critical factor on the power play, primarily for his face-offs, honestly, because the other night, in fact, we didn't talk about that officiating situation, where Nyquist gets stopped on one side of the ice, and the face-off on that power play they put on the opposite side of the ice. And
Hurdle complains about it too.
Livid because they don't have Pavelski out there to take the right-sided draws. So Pavelski is critical on the power play. I was just saying he's been terrible in the playoffs, even though, yes, he is a critical part of the power play. He was their leading power play scorer in the regular season.
He's not producing.
They certainly miss him. He just hasn't been a factor yet in the playoffs. I'm not saying he won't be. He just, up to this point, he hasn't been.
He hasn't produced much 5-on-5, right? You're right. He does get in front of the goalie's eyes, and that helps to some extent. But, I agree. I think power play, if you're going to leave on one if we're going to sign off on some note, I think power play is the one to really focus on. If you can get that aspect, if you can change just that one aspect of the game, I think that the Sharks have a much better
You have
chance.
to think that's going to bite them in the ass at some point if they don't get it together. It may not be this series, it may not be next round, but eventually that's going to come back to haunt them if they don't figure it out. And they don't need to, produce at a 30% clip, but, even 20%. I don't know what their numbers are right now, but I'd imagine it's probably around 15% in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's probably pretty low. I'd have to do math to figure it out, but it's because, I mean, you're talking Vegas. They had the one game where they were 1 for 8, which is just a ridiculously low power play percentage. And I can only think of a couple power play goals in this series.
Yeah, we have 2 this series. The one by Burns at the end of the game when the game was already over, and then the one last night. Those are the only 2 power play goals they've had in this series. And they haven't had as many power plays this series, but still they've got to take advantage of those because of how well Grubauer is playing, right? I mean, that's your best opportunity to score against him. And if you're not scoring on the power play, then you're going to have games like last night where you can dominate, but you're not pulling away because you can't get one by Grubauer. So.
And maybe hit an empty net once in a while. That'd be good too.
I swear to God, I was
so
going to jump through the screen and strangle a few people with. And one that surprised me is Couture missed it. He never misses the empty net.
Yeah, no. And he had a decent angle on it. I mean, it wasn't like it
was a clean look.
Extreme angle.
It wasn't like Kane the other night who had somebody draped around him and he was clean and free. But
Anyways, we've gone a little long. This is, I think, our longest show now.
Yeah.
So any last thoughts before we take off?
Not for me.
So none for me, other than if you're listening to us on the podcast and for some reason you want to see our faces, which I can promise doesn't enhance the experience, you can check us out. We do the show live on video. You hear us talking to people.
Viewer discretion advised.
Yeah. You hear us talking to people and answering questions. It's stuff we see in the chat. So if you ever want to join in and jump in the chat, check out Sports Talk 916. We usually post when we have a show coming up, and then that's where we stream from. You can check us out on Twitter at Sharks Talk 916. And you can check out, we should both actually write a blog sometime soon since we haven't in a while, but we do blog on sportstalk916.com. And again, the great to check out if you like any other sports in this area. So Giants, I don't think they talk about A's much because Nolan and I are the only two who would root for the A's. So
no, I'm a Giants fan too.
Oh, sorry, I'm the only one who would root for the A's.
Yeah, they talk Giants, 49ers, Raiders, Kings, Warriors, a little bit more Kings oriented, but any of the local teams.
Yeah, so any other local area sports teams, check them out. And other than that, we'll let you know when we're on again. Thanks a lot for listening.
See you guys.